Now moving forward, according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the second day of US-mediated peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Geneva saw substantive discussions. He said that while some groundwork has been laid, the two sides still disagree on key issues, including the future of occupied territories in eastern Ukraine and the status of the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. The talks ended abruptly after 2 hours, with Zelenskyy accusing Russia of deliberately slowing progress. Moreover, Ukraine's lead negotiator Rustem Umerov has also reported that security parameters and implementation mechanisms were reviewed and some issues were clarified while others required further coordination. Let's first listen in.
2 дня, очень долго вчера, в разных форматах, и вот еще сегодня, около 2 часов. Они были тяжелыми, но деловыми. В ближайшее время состоится следующая встреча. Это все, что мы хотели сказать. Спасибо.
Meanwhile, Russian lead negotiator Volodymyr Zelenskyy has described the talks as challenging but businesslike, stating that discussions would continue in the near future. Let's listen in.
Today we had another round of trilateral negotiations in the Ukraine-US-Russia format. The discussions were intensive and substantive. We thank our US partners for ensuring that the process is not stopping and continues, and Swiss side for hosting us and hospitality. Within the delegation, both political and military tracks were engaged. Security parameters and mechanisms for implementing possible decisions were discussed. A number of issues were clarified, while others remain under additional coordination.
Joining me now in this discussion is former Moscow bureau chief of the Delhi Telegraph, Ben Aris, joining me from Berlin. And thanks very much for joining us. Firstly, contradictory statements coming in from the two warring parties and then from the United States. While the US says meaningful progress has been achieved, clearly Zelenskyy and team are speaking out of the irritants that continue to remain, whether it's the occupied territories or the security guarantees and the parameters. How long really do you think before the two leaders can actually sit together and nod their invoice?
Well, that's going to be a key stage in this talks, and it's coming. It needs to happen, in so much as, you know, what we were hearing yesterday, Vitkov was saying is very positive. The Russian side were being a bit more pessimistic and said that the talks were quote unquote tense. But look, we should take encouragement out of what's going on at the moment, because it seems to me the significant change here is Medinsky is back in the negotiating team at the head of the Russian delegation. And he's the guy that failed at the end of the day 2022 Istanbul peace deal, where a deal was struck but wasn't signed off by Zelenskyy. And what we had in Abu Dhabi at the last meeting, as Zelenskyy there in your clip alluded to, was largely a security focused discussion that seemed to have made some progress. But because he's back now, what that means is they're digging into the details of a final agreement, you know, all of the details. That's what Medinsky's there for. So part of that is going to be this sticking point, the lands, the territory, who controls Donbass. And Zelensky's come out and said that that can only be resolved at the level of presidents. There has to be a face-to-face meeting between the presidents. And we've seen progress there as well, in so much as previously Putin rather ridiculously invited Zelenskyy to Moscow to talk. Of course, he said no. Zelenskyy countered and said, come to Kiev. Of course, Putin said no, but now the idea has been floated the two meet in Geneva, and that's a serious offer. So when will that happen? No one knows. I mean, Trump has a deadline. There has to be some sort of referendum and elections by May, so sometime between now and May, it could happen. But if that meeting happens, then we're in the final mile, and a deal could be done to end this war.
Zelenskyy is also noting, Ben, that there's undue pressure on Ukraine from the United States. And he had said that earlier as well, where he said that only Russia only Ukraine is asked to make concessions and not Russia, really. So Zelensky is clearly feeling this pressure. He says talks are lopsided, even on part of the United States. How can his concerns really be addressed?
Well, he's right, and it's true. That all the pressure is on Zelensky basically to concede the territories in Donbass that Russia's demanding. And that's partly because Putin has made it clear that he's not going to budge, he's not going to compromise on that one jot. And he doesn't have to, as far as Putin's concerned, because either Zelensky's going to give it away and bring the war to an end now, or he's not going to give it away and Russia's going to take it militarily, which may take up to a year. As for Trump's position, the White House, again, the reporting coming out of Washington suggests that the White House also thinks that Zelensky has no chance of hanging on to it. The territory is lost, and he might as well make that concession now. And in order to bring this across the line, because Trump said very clearly he wants a deal done before the midterm elections this autumn, that they're putting all the pressure on Zelensky to make that concession, to give away the unoccupied parts of Donbass in order to close the deal, because they know, the Russian side know, that there's no way that they can persuade Putin, and they have no leverage over Putin to force him to do it. So the only option here is to get Zelensky to give it up. And so he's being harangued both by the Russian side and by the American side to cede this territory to Russia.
All right, Ben, to continue to stay on with me, viewers, let's also tell you that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has emphasized the importance of Europe's involvement in peace talks aimed at ending Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky has called Europe's participation in ongoing peace talks in Geneva essential for any agreements aimed at halting Russia's invasion to hold. In a statement on social media Wednesday, Zelensky said Europe's involvement is indispensable for the success of feasible agreements. Zelensky also described the negotiations as difficult, accusing the Russian delegation of stalling the process. He said Russia is delaying what could already be a final stage of talks, adding pressure as the second day of discussions continues. All right, Ben requested to join us back in the discussion here. Of course, Europe is the only real partner, European countries, for Zelensky. But in your opinion, is Europe or the coalition of the willing really helping Zelensky?
Absolutely, in the sense that since Trump came into office, he sent no money to Ukraine at all. It used to account for about 40% of the funding, and that's essential because half the budget, Ukrainian budget, is funded from outside. And now, at the moment, all of the money is coming from Europe. So if Europe withdrew its support, then the Ukrainian government would immediately collapse. It wouldn't have money to pay teachers, nor would it have money to pay soldiers, and they'd have to be a capitulation. So it's essential from that point of view. In terms of the negotiations, the ceasefire deal, the security deals, Europe's actually been excluded from all of these negotiations by the states. I mean, they asked to participate in the trilateral deal meetings that just have been in Geneva and were refused. So they're sitting on the outside as helpless observers, but paying for the war. So from Zelensky's point of view, Europe is essential because it's what keeps him in the game. It keeps his men on the battlefield, which allows him to have some leverage in the talks when negotiating a ceasefire. Without Europe's help, he'd be helpless.
All right, Ben, thanks very much then for joining me in this discussion here. And viewers,